Good afternoon, and if you're calling from the West Coast, good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Porras, and I am the Senior Manager for Education and Outreach at CAQH Core. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to our webinar titled Phase 4 CAQH Core Operating Rules, Implementation, Value Proposition, and Infrastructure Requirements. And now, before we begin today's webinar, here is CAQH Core Director Denise Benning with a special update on the Phase 4 Operating Rules. Denise?
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, everybody. As this is a national webinar dedicated to talking about business requirements and early adoption of the CAQH Core Phase 4 Operating Rules, I can't think of any better forum in which to share some Phase 4 news with you. This past Wednesday, in an email to all CAQH Core participating organizations, the Core Chair and Vice Chair shared the news that the National Committee on Vital and Health Statistics, the advisory committee to the Secretary of HHS, had posted a draft letter to its website with recommendations for the proposed Phase 4 CAQH Core Operating Rules as called for by Section 1104 of the Affordable Care Act. This letter will be a topic of discussion at next week's NCVHS meeting in Washington. In summary, NCVHS strongly supports the voluntary adoption and use of the Phase 4 rules by industry and recommends to the Secretary that the rules not be adopted by federal regulation at this time. Our CAQH Core Board of Directors is in the process of performing an analysis of the draft NCVHS letter. Included in any CAQH Core response to the NCVHS is sure to be our recognition of all the hard work and tremendous support from our CAQH Core participating organizations, a multi-stakeholder collaborative consisting of entities that actually create, transmit, or use healthcare administrative data. Our health plan participants alone represent more than 70% of the commercially insured in this country. Together, these nearly 140 entities collaboratively undertook review, discussion, and voting using the transparent CAQH Core voting process to arrive at the final version of the rules that was unanimously approved by the CAQH Core Board last September. For Phase 4, more than 90% of CAQH Core voting participants took part in the final vote with an astounding 88% approval rating. This strong support demonstrates industry's belief in the value that the rules have in creating an achievable and foundational platform for realizing the promise of administrative simplification. CAQH Core is getting results. Our work will soon include another milestone, our 300th Core certification. Future activities such as evaluating opportunities to support value-based purchasing are planned, but just as important, we will continue our commitment to both maintaining and driving adoption of all phases of the operating rules. Your participation in today's webinar is proof again that CAQH Core is continuing as a national resource to help the industry to achieve meaningful results. And we look forward to working with CAQH Core participants as well as the entire industry to make sure that our focus and priorities reflect your needs. Jessica, thanks for giving me this time to talk directly to our webinar participants today.
Thank you so much, Denise. And now I'd like to mention a few logistical items. You can download a copy of today's presentation from the CAQH.org website. To do so, navigate to the Core pull-down menu at the top of the CAQH.org welcome screen and select the Core Education Events page. A link to the PDF version of the presentation can be found under the listing for today's webinar. On this slide, you can see a screenshot of the attendee GoToWebinar dashboard. You should see something that looks similar to this on the right side of your computer desktop. When joining today's sessions, it's possible you may have joined the audio portion of the webinar using your computer speakers by default. If possible, we would prefer you to join the webinar audio by telephone. To do this, please select the telephone audio button in the audio panel of your dashboard, and the dial-in information will be displayed. Make sure you enter your audio PIN, which is found under your dial-in information. We will save time at the end of today's program dedicated to responding to audience questions. You're encouraged to submit your questions at any time during this webinar. by typing them into the questions panel on your dashboard. We do ask that when you submit your question, you identify the type of organization you're with so we can give you a more accurate response. Today, we will start off with a special message from Humana about why they've chosen to implement the Phase 4 CAQH core operating rules. He will be followed by several presentations on the value proposition for implementation, available implementation tools and resources, and then we'll go through the infrastructure requirements. And we will make sure to leave plenty of time for you to ask your questions. And now I would like to introduce Kim Peters, Process Owner for Provider Process Implementation at Humana. Kim oversees all EDI data receipt and transmission for Humana and manages a team of 20 associates that work with providers and internal Humana teams to analyze and resolve provider EDI issues. He works extensively with WEDI and X12 to provide direction and oversight for Humana interests related to new government regulations. Kim is also responsible for all HIPAA complaints and X12 transaction compliance related projects. In addition, Kim directed the team responsible for Humana becoming Core Phase 1, 2, and 3 certified, and he is currently working with Core as a beta tester for the Core Phase 4 testing and certification. Kim spent 25 years in IT before taking his current business leadership position, and we are delighted to have him with us today. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you. So, just to give you some background, Humana has been in service for over 50 years. We are concentrating on lifelong well-being today. Even though we're a healthcare services company, we're driving towards making members' lives better and more healthy by 20% by 2020. That's one of our goals. It's a financially stable company. We're listed at 58 on the Fortune 500. We're multifaceted. We do commercial, individual, Medicare, Medicaid, and specialty benefits. Personally dedicated to providing personalized, exceptional service. And if we go to the next screen, why is Humana implementing Phase 4? Humana has tried to be a leader in the industry. We continuously try to figure out what the next level of transactions are that are going to make a difference in the industry, and we strive to get those into our operating system as quick as possible. So in that aspect, it supports administrative simplification. We always strive to be a leader and drive healthcare to a new paradigm. We don't feel like it's right to sit back and wait for legislation in order to implement stuff. I just testified, or not testified, but talked with CMS last week at WEDI, and I made it clear that we need to, as an industry, look at how do we go out there and make things happen today that are better for our industry instead of waiting for somebody to legislate it or give us direction to do it. Humana's constantly working on a CAQH core operating rules, and Phase 4 is that next level of compliance that we want to make sure that we're involved in, because by being one of the beta testers, we're able to, one, make sure that our system is ready to operate under the new rules, and number two, it helps to define if there are any issues, what do we do to fix it and make it a better process going forward. Next phase. We were one of the first entities to achieve Phase 1, 2, and 3 core certification, and the reason we did this is because of the actual language that was built into the legislation, where it said you can either attest to being compliant or you can actually go out and become core certified. In our organization, we had several discussions about what the benefit would be, and we felt like because it was written into the legislation, the core certification would gain us a more actionable argument if we got into any types of questions within the industry. And lo and behold, we've had several people come to us, and lodged complaints against Humana saying you're not in compliance, and we were able to fall back on both our core certification and clarification of the rules, because sometimes the language in the rule does not necessarily follow what the transaction issues are that they're complaining. One of the complaints that we dealt with was a member ID, and we were able to argue that because our ID card had a member ID with a suffix, the suffix is really a relationship code, that we were still core certified and we were HIPAA compliant because of the way we were handling the transaction. But I think the core seal was actually a benefit because it gives you more weight in the industry whenever you say that, we're trying to do everything possible. And I don't think anybody can ever say they're going to be 100% compliant 100% of the time. There's always going to be some little glitch here or there with a transaction or with a process that may make you non-compliant on a transaction or two, but as long as we're working towards that ultimate solution, I think that gets us where we need to be. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm already done.
That's fine. We can go back if you have more to say, Kim.
No, I just I talk a little faster than I should sometimes, but I'm open for questions after the rest of the presentation is done. If anybody wants to ask anything.
Sounds good. Thank you. We'll have time for Q&A, and I'm sure people will have questions for you. But okay. For now, we have our first polling question of the webinar. And I will read the polling question, and then what I'll do is I'll open up the poll for everyone, all the attendees, to answer directly on their screen. So this question asks, which stage or stages of implementing the Phase 4 CAQH core operating rules are you planning to complete in 2016? And this is a check all that apply. So I will open the poll, and we'll pause for about 10 or 15 seconds for everyone to respond. And there might be many, so feel free to check more than one. We'll take about 5 more seconds. All right. We'll close the poll, and I'll share the results with everybody. So we see here that 56% of the attendees who voted said that internal education and awareness would be a stage that they are implementing. 48% said analysis and planning. 23% said systems implementation and integration and testing. 26% indicated that they are not planning to start voluntary implementation this year, and then followed by 17% saying deployment and maintenance. Denise, do you have any comments based on these results?
Well, in comparison to polls that we've done on this very same question in the past, we're seeing jumps. We're seeing leaps in internal education and awareness numbers up from 52%, analysis and planning system design up almost 10%, systems implementation, integration and testing up again another 5%, a little bit lower in deployment and maintenance, and pretty much the same on that last one where it says we're not planning to start anything this year. So I think that, again, we are looking at our obligation here is to be able to provide the information to drive these numbers up even higher and get everybody on board and working towards that voluntary implementation. So this is great news, and I think it's again, shows that we are building momentum and that we are going to be able to provide all this information to take people to the next step, whatever step they might be in.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Denise. And now, CAQH Core Associate Director Robert Bowman will walk us through the Phase 4 CAQH Core Operating Rule benefits and value proposition for implementation. Bob, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Drew. And as you can see on the next slide, we really do want to build upon what Kim shared with us, and also with our interest in driving folks to adopt the operating rules on a voluntary basis at this point, to make sure that they have everything that they need. So we saw that from the survey, this latest one today and ones in the past, that there's a real key interest in learning more about what the operating rule requirements actually are, and making sure that those are well understood within your organization. And then ensuring that those projects can get off the ground. You can complete a gap analysis, you can go through system remediation, you can go through implementation. So we hope that this part of the presentation this afternoon can help give you some guiding principles to help you get those kind of projects off the ground, make sure we can answer some of those key questions that you might have around those business processes and improvements that we know that the rules have been very important in facilitating. So beginning with voluntary implementation for phase 4, if you plan on doing it this year or even next, things that your organization can experience. Obviously, you're going to, just as Kim said, for Humana, establish leadership in the industry as an early adopter. Now, Humana is perhaps a special case because they are moving forward with as a beta tester, so they're really early adopter. But it doesn't mean that any other organization that can go down this path, and it's not very arduous, as I'm sure Kim can probably relate to you, hopefully during our Q&A session, but being that early adopter is very important. You can determine your own timeline, just as Kim said. You can set up your own project plan, your own milestones, make sure that it fits in with your own typical cycle for implementation projects for your systems. It demonstrates that you're committed to administrative simplification because you know that it's very costly to conduct many of these transactions in a manual way. So going through and implementing the electronic transactions, the operating rules, and building those processes into an existing system is much cheaper than continuing a manual process. Again, it really does build upon the work that you've done in the previous phases. So you've already gone through phase 1, 2, and 3. You have systems and applications that are built, kind of just waiting and ready for the rest of the HIPAA transactions to fall into those systems and those processes. So it allows you to build upon what you've already done. Moving into some more specific points on the next slide, you'll see that there are very specific messages that you can share with decision makers and executives in your organization to ensure that you have buy-in and to make sure that you can have those specific business process of improvements in place to make sure that those projects do get green-lighted, that you get approvals. And some of these include, again, applying that consistent infrastructure across all of your transactions to achieve that economies of scale. You've already implemented the 835 and the 270-271 transaction using this infrastructure, applying the 837 or the 278, the claim and the prior authorization in that same process. Again, achieves economy of scale. Recognizing that there are very specific steps for financial management, and many of these are interrelated processes. Supporting many and multiple different ways of conducting the same transaction becomes very costly, and kind of seeing that through implementation into more uniform processes, you can see where you can save money. Addressing the interrelatedness of clinical and financial data is also very important, and especially as the industry moves more and more to value-based payment models, through ensuring that the clinical and financial data is very much synced up, not only with what that data is and how you use it, but also how you receive it, how you store it, access to that data. So moving to electronic processes, again, getting off of any sort of paper, manual, or web provider click page. Anytime that a provider has to click on your home page to access a prior authorization, for example, is very costly both for him and for you as a health plan, just as an example. Again, eliminating any redundancy in financial processes, as well as ensuring that certain very specific processes support efficiencies and gain greater transparency for your patients through time. Again, with phase 4, including claims and prior authorizations, two very important transactions, could be very important for you as an implementer to ensure that the operating rules are in place to reduce costs. On the next couple of slides, we do want to focus specifically on 3 key components around the value proposition. This first one is about saving money. Our next one is around customer satisfaction, and then we'll talk about quality. Beginning here with the value proposition and reducing cost and increasing efficiency. it's going to be really important to ensure that the rules include requirements around response times and acknowledgements to make sure that nothing falls in the black hole or the black box, but also to ensure that the providers are informed really about the status of the transactions as they move through the cycle, either for claims adjudication or through prior authorization approvals, or even for the 834 and 820, knowing that very specific requirements around when that data will be processed, when it will be available for use downstream. There'll be less time spent verifying information over the phone, again, removing that manual component. Providers can immediately learn about their claim submissions where they successfully received and moved into the adjudication system with the appropriate acknowledgments in place. They can also ensure that they know where the prior authorization request is and when to pick up the response, because there are certain response time requirements that are included in the rule. CAQH core safe harbor requirements ensures that providers can connect online through HTTPS, through a direct connection with the health plan or through their trading partners to ensure that they can actually conduct the transactions. Providers can also improve their coordination of benefits through more timely eligibility information, as well as understanding that COB is a key component of the companion guide for the 837. So if there are specific requirements that a health plan requires for COB, those are now more easily related back to the provider so they can understand those requirements. And lastly, health plans can build on the investments that they already made for infrastructure because of phase 1, 2, and 3 for the eligibility, claim status, EFT, and the ERA. But you've already gone through those implementation projects, and you can build upon that by including the rest of the HIPAA suite of transactions. On the next slide, we're going to move into improving customer satisfaction. Again, a key component for the value proposition. Again, harking back to the idea and the key requirements for safe harbor connectivity. It allows you to conduct the transactions with any trading partner upon request. This we have seen greatly reduce the trading partner onboarding process from months, many times, when you have to set up a VPN, you set up these direct connections, they're in line with trading partners. Moving to this core safe harbor requirement to support SOAP transactions over the internet, it reduces it down to as little as less than 2 weeks. We have very specific use cases and case studies where trading partners can be onboarded in less than 2 weeks. Also, use of the core companion guide template makes it much easier to engage with your trading partners. One companion guide for your 837 so everyone can access that information and know exactly how to conduct that transaction, how to test with you, and what all of the requirements are for your particular transaction, specifically specified in the companion guide template. Again, timely data will also lead to faster treatment and consolidation of your clinical and financial transactions. Again, this improves patient satisfaction. On the next slide, we'll see that we also want to make sure that the value proposition includes quality improvements. The core rule requirements can help reduce errors and confusion and also increase security, because with phase 4 we move into the required use of a digital certificate authentication, which is again from B2B requirements for that authentication. So it helps improve greatly upon just a username password levels for security. It really does meet sort of national standards for transmitting PHI through a secure connectivity and connection. Real-time connectivity requirements do specify within the rules. Again, you may not be conducting the 837 in real time, but there are requirements that if you wish to move in that direction, there are requirements for real time for these 4 transactions to ensure that we're really kind of laying and thinking about the future for these transactions. Again, laying down the track so everyone knows exactly where the train needs to go. Health plans do have a common set of infrastructure rules across all the transactions, so your providers can now rely specifically on secure connectivity, acknowledgements, companion guides, system availability, and common expectations around the process mode, how you're conducting the transactions, and the response times for each transaction. So everyone kind of knows now this is the standard to be used when conducting these transactions. And not just for the first couple through phases 1 through 3, but now for the entire set of the HIPAA-mandated transactions. And with that, I'll hand the call back over. I believe we're at polling question.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Bob. Great information. And so this brings us to our second polling question of the webinar. And just like last time, I'll read the question and then open the poll for everyone to respond. And this question asks, what are the anticipated benefits to your organization's implementation of the Phase 4 CAQH Core operating rules? And like last time, this is a select all that apply, because there could be more than one. So I will open the poll, and we will pause for a brief moment for everyone to respond. 15 seconds. And Bob and Denise, I might ask for some comments based on the results. We'll take about 5 more seconds. We have 50% indicating that they voted. Take about 2 more seconds and I'll share the results. All right, I will close the poll and share the results with everybody. Well, it looks like the highest percent, 55%, said that improved services, followed by 41% of those voted indicated that it would improve workflow, followed by 35% saying cost reductions, 30% indicated they don't know, and then 10% said it's not applicable. Bob or Denise, what do you make of these results?
I was going to say, I think it was Bob. Go ahead, Bob.
I'm sorry. No, I was going to just jump in and say that definitely the intent of the rules is to improve, the connectivity and to conduct the transactions to make it easier for providers to interact with health plans for these specific transactions, the claim and the prior authorization. And then you will say that the claim, most of our claims go electronically. We don't have a problem. However, when you do have a problem, it's much harder to resolve those issues. And the operating rules will hopefully reduce that manual burden that you have in ensuring that you have acknowledgments, the status of the transaction. Did it really make it into adjudication, or did it get kicked out on a front end to edit? So those are kind of important key requirements in using the 999 transaction, and specifically the 277 claim acknowledgement transaction.
And this is Denise. I'm looking at that 30% that don't know. So obviously we still have some job to do out there in making sure that everybody understands the many benefits of not only the operating rules, but Phase 4 in particular. And you can be sure that we're going to be sharing information from early adopters like Humana and others so that you can clearly see how they've implemented it and what the benefits that they're experiencing, and hopefully be able to apply that to your own situation. So I think those numbers look really good.
Great. Thank you to you both. And I think we will carry on now. And so now I would like to introduce CAQH Core Senior Project Associate Tyler Schultz, who will describe the Phase 4 CAQH Core Operating Rule Implementation Resources, as well as talk about the Phase 4 Certification Program. Tyler, go ahead.
Thanks, Drew. As Drew mentioned, my name is Tyler Schultz. I'm a Core Senior Project Associate. And throughout the history of our operating rule phases, we've always coupled the implementation and certification processes with resources that are intended to make this experience as easy and seamless as possible. On slide 17, some of the challenges to an easy and seamless experience tend to be a busy team that may have competing priorities, such as a large team project or looming deadlines. Another may be regulatory fatigue in our industry. There also might be just too many deliverables, which can really make it hard to determine which resources you should actually be using. And finally, you might also run into a circumstance in which you're competing for resources, and that's really not an uncommon occurrence. But know that the CAQH Core team is constantly aware of these challenges and have stated its commitment to easing the operating rule implementation process, as you can see below. Note that these resources and tools available on the CAQH Core Implementation Resources page are available at no cost to the user whatsoever. CAQH Core offers core certification to entities that create, transmit, or use the administrative transactions addressed by the CAQH Core operating rules. When you have been awarded core certification, it means that you are part of an entity that has demonstrated that its IT system or product is operating in conformance with a specific phase or phases of the CAQH Core operating rules and underlying standards. If you're unsure if core certification applies, please feel free to contact us at core@caqh.org. On slide 18, and as with phases 1 through 3 of the CAQH core operating rules, CORE has released an analysis and planning guide for the phase 4 CAQH core operating rules. With the planning guide, we have identified 3 key uses for your project staff, which include understanding the applicability of phase 4 operating rules requirements, identifying all impacted external and internal systems, and conducting detailed rule requirements gap analysis. These 3 uses also correlate with tasks B, C, and D in the analysis and planning guide, almost as a step-by-step. On slide 19, the first use is stakeholder and business type evaluation. The key takeaways here are to coordinate planning and implementation, and also to determine your stakeholder type and which phase rules apply to you and your trading partners. For each task in the analysis and planning guide, we'd recommend that you share these key takeaways as goals with your project team before you begin. Next, outlined here on slide 20 is the System Inventory and Impact Assessment Worksheet. Key takeaways are to understand how many of your systems or products are impacted by each phase 4 operating rule requirement, and also identifying which vendors you will need to coordinate and communicate with. And then finally, on slide 21, the third use identified is shown here, the Gap Analysis Worksheet. The key takeaway for you and your project team is to understand the level of system remediating necessary for adopting the business and technical requirements of the phase 4 operating rules. And it is often one of the most popular resources that we have on our site. And finally, on slide 22, of course, whenever you and your project team are in the process of implementation and or core certification, there are bound to be questions. We'd recommend that you visit our core FAQ page. We recently upgraded our FAQ page to make searching individual FAQs an easy process. On the FAQ homepage, you can use the search bar to simply enter in a few keywords to find your FAQ. The new FAQ page also allows you to view FAQs on a more granular level with those drop-down pages for each phase of the operating rules. There are more than 500 FAQs available on the page at current date, which includes new, unique Phase 4 FAQs. Core certification is the most robust and widely recognized industry program of its kind. With core certification, you are assured an independent, industry-developed confirmation of conformance with operating rules and underlying standards. These requirements go through a development process that includes broad, multi-stakeholder industry representation. That process uses transparent discussion and a constant polling process. Core certification also goes through required conformance testing, which is conducted by third-party testing vendors that are experts, leading experts in EDI and testing. And important to note, CAQH Core serves as a neutral, non-commercial administrator that, one, authorizes the conformance testing vendors and reviews and approves the certification applications and conformance test reports through a thoughtful and thorough multi-level review from our team here before a certification seal is awarded. Shown here on slide 24, we've provided a crosswalk of the benefits of voluntary core certification for all stakeholders in the industry. When implementation and or core certification, I'd highly recommend referring to these benefits and sharing with your team and colleagues. It's really an important kind of layout of what we have available and why it's so important to the industry. And again, it really is the key theme here. Why is it a benefit to you and your organization? From a higher level perspective, you can look at the Phase 4 CAQH Core Operating Rule implementation as an 8-step approach or process outlined here, beginning with an initial assessment of the rules on through to filing for core certification with our team here in Washington, D.C. And on slide 26, before I turn back to my colleague Drew, I'd like to share a few keys to success in the Phase 4 CAQH Core Operating Rule implementation process. First, make sure to establish open communication with your trading partner or partners as they play an integral role in the process. And secondly, set yourself up for success in the planning process by creating the best plan for you and your project team. Start with the goal of core certification at top of mind. Document all the necessary actions in the process. You cannot just focus on testing or some other singular aspect. It must be wholesome. Take full advantage of the CAQH Core implementation tools which are available, again, at no cost at all. Use these tools to base your approach. The analysis and planning guide is arranged in a step-by-step format. Try to use that as your guide. And now, finally, make sure to keep open and frequent communication with your trading partners regarding planning and testing approaches. Thank you all for your time. I'll now turn it back over to my colleague, Drew Voital, to share your third polling question.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Tyler. And this brings us to our last polling question of the webinar. And just like last time, I'll read it and then open for everyone to respond. And this is a check only one reply instead of a multiple choice. So this question asks, which of the following is the biggest challenge to your organization's implementation of the Phase 4 CAQH Core operating rules? And I will open the poll, and I will share with everybody to reply. It will take about 20 seconds for everyone to log their response. Take about 10 more seconds. And like last time, Bob or Denise, I might have you chime in with your thoughts based on the results that we get. Take about 3 more seconds, and I'll share the results. All right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results with everybody. So the big one here, looks like 54% indicate that having enough resources, either time, staff, or money for implementation, and then followed by 19% saying fully understanding the requirements, 13% saying the decision makers in their organization have not given the go-ahead, and then followed by a tie at 7% indicating no major challenges are not applicable. Denise, or I see you shaking your head. Do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I think, again, this is very consistent with the polling results that we got the last time we put this question out there. And of course, overcoming, organizational issues, resources, time is always a key challenge. We've seen pretty consistent results in decision makers and fully understanding the requirements. So, the great thing is that a lot of these resources that Tyler just talked about can really help in overcoming some of the resource constraints, and that it's already done for you. All you have to do is kind of fill in the answers and come to some informed conclusions. And I think that we will continue to put some of the resources out there to make it as easy and as less constraining as possible for people to start implementation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Denise. And so we will carry on now to our last part of the webinar, and I will turn it back over to Bob, and he will walk us through the Phase 4 CAQH Core Operating Rule infrastructure requirements. Bob, go ahead.
Great, thanks, Drew. And as part of that process, this webinar and many others, we want to focus on some of the key components of the operating rules themselves to make sure that you become more familiar with those requirements. And so for this webinar today, we are going to focus on the 4 infrastructure requirements that are specific to the 4 transactions in Phase 4. And that, saying that, is that although we won't be addressing the connectivity rule requirements, we have done that over a series of webinars over the last couple of months earlier this spring. You'll continue to see more education components and webinars come out for the entire rule set throughout the rest of the year, and more discussions around connectivity and the challenges. And how easy it probably actually is for implementation, because again, it's building off what you've already done for Phases 1, 2, and 3. But for the focus for the 4 rules, we do want to look at the next slide, just so you can see generally what this table displays is where there are infrastructure requirements and how they fit into each of the 4 transactions. So we do have processing mode, real-time and batch. We have batch acknowledgements and real-time acknowledgements for all of the transactions. We have a safe harbor connectivity requirement, a system availability and companion guide template, universal for all 4 transactions. And then there are some requirements that are specific to the transaction. So another key component that the work groups and subgroups looked at for each of the transactions, whether there's something else, was there something that we should also include as a requirement based on the infrastructure of the transactions that could be important to ensuring that the transactions and the operating rules can help reduce some burden, some problem that either providers or health plans have experienced. And you'll see some specific requirements for example, the claims, the enrollment, disenrollment, and the premium payment transaction. So with that, I want to talk through each of the major requirements for infrastructure for each of the transactions. Again, at a very high level, just make sure that you have a firm understanding of the transaction. I'm sorry, a firm understanding of the operating rule requirement. And so on the next slide, you'll see that it specifically addresses the batch processing mode response time requirements. So again, there's a requirement to conduct the transaction, the 837, the 834, 820 in batch. So there are specific requirements related to that. If you submit the batch of transactions by 9 p.m. Eastern Time on a business day, the responses must be available by 7 a.m. within a number of specified business days. Again, it varies between transactions, so it's not really precise here on this slide, but you understand that there are certain requirements for ensuring that the response time for those transactions, making sure that the 999 or the 277 CA, for the case of claims, is made available within a certain number of days. On the next slide, kind of expanding upon that, there are specific batch acknowledgement requirements. So not only do you have to process the transaction within a certain number of days, the specific acknowledgement transaction must be made available within that time frame. So again, it does require the use of the 999 for all of the transactions, and for the claim, the 277 CA must also be returned. Again, very specific requirements on exactly which acknowledgement must be used for each of the transactions. And building upon that with the response time requirements, you know exactly when the transaction must be made available. Moving on to the next slide. Again, this slide focuses on the real-time processing mode. Now, many of you may not offer any of these transactions in real time today. Potentially, perhaps the 278 or the 837 for a real-time claims adjudication process. But again, we're laying down the foundation or the tracks, to use that analogy, so that you know that as the industry matures and as the process for the administrative transaction improves, and how providers need to have better access to this data, better access to payments more expeditiously, these rule requirements help lay down that foundation. So you understand that the acknowledgement or the response is available within 20 seconds, that maximum round-trip response time. Again, this is no different than how the requirements for the 270, 271 or the 276, 277 transaction for phase 1 and phase 2. It's the same requirement. It's consistent from phases 1 through 4 now for, again, conducting these transactions in real time. Moving on to the next slide. We move into, again, that very specific requirements around acknowledgements. There are, again, the same requirement for the 999, and since this is real time, it's to actually to indicate if there's if the transaction has been rejected. And that's true for both the 837, 278, and the 834 and 820. Again, conducting these in real time, so it's maybe a different way of thinking about these transactions, but to ensure that the transactions, if you do conduct them in real time, you acknowledge them with the 999 if there's an error, or you can send back the actual response for the 278, right? Instead of just the negative 999, you could also return the 278 response. Again, for the claim transaction only, the 277 CA would also be used to indicate that the functional group is accepted or accepted with errors. So the same set of acknowledgements are used in real-time and batch, just when they're required to be returned is going to be important. Again, we have specific requirements for that real-time processing mode too. On the next slide, kind of expanding into the next topic is specific requirements for safe harbor connectivity and security requirements. We won't go into a lot of detail, but just to make sure that it doesn't enable the trading partners to use different communication and security methods than what's specified in the rule. This is just a safe harbor. So at a minimum, you have to support these requirements to conduct the transactions with your trading partners upon request. As an example, if you're a health plan and a clearinghouse wishes to connect with you and conduct the 837 transaction using the core connectivity method and the specific requirements for security, you would allow that to come in through that method. But you already have relationships established with your trading partner community using a variety of other methods of sending and receiving these transactions and acknowledgements. Those do not have to be unplugged. Those can be or de-implemented. They can remain existing as you do it today, and they're unchanged. So at a bare minimum, support the minimum requirements, and continue to conduct business as you do today. Next, moving into the next topic for the infrastructure requirements is your system availability requirement. The core rules do require, and this is again unchanged from the previous three phases, a minimum amount of time that your system must be up and available to conduct the transactions, and that's 86% of the time. There are also requirements around when your system is down, you have to be able to notify your trading partner community. Publish regularly scheduled downtimes. If there's an emergency downtime, you provide information around that occurrence within 1 hour. Provide a 1 week advance notice for non-routine downtime. We understand that certain systems and applications you have every quarter there's a cycle change and you update your system, or it's annual or biannual or weekly on Sundays between midnight and 4 a.m. you make system updates and patches and fixes, or you test. All of that is definitely unchanged. We don't make you change necessarily that as long as your system's up 86% of the time. We just want to make sure you communicate to your training partner community when those systems and outages occur. On the next slide, you'll see that we also move on to the next topic, and that is specific to the companion guide. Similar to phase 1, 2, and 3, we have specific companion guide requirements for the flow and format of what information appears in the companion guide. So you see here this kind of list of bulleted items. These are the types of things that you'll have in your companion guide to ensure that your trading partners can really kind of pick this up, know exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to conduct the transactions with you. We try to make it really kind of like a plug and play, although it's a template, just for the data that's included. It makes it much easier as a clearinghouse or as a software vendor when they have to set up connection with you, test with you as a health plan, making sure that they have everything that they need. Again, the companion guide template is a requirement for all 4 of the transactions in phase 4. Moving on to the next slide, we do have specific requirements for, again, unique requirements for the claim, the benefit enrollment maintenance, and the payroll premium payment transaction as well. These are very nuanced, so I won't go into a lot of detail or depth, but it's very specific around processing the processing the acknowledgement transaction, and these are requirements for receivers. So we want to make sure that there's a complete cycle of the transactions being conducted and everyone understands their roles and responsibilities. So for example, the healthcare claim, the receiver of the 999, this may be a provider, it could be a software vendor, practice management software, or it could be a clearinghouse. They've submitted a batch of claims to the health plan. The health plan has acknowledged that, and now the health plan is sent the 999 or the 277 CA to the clearinghouse. There's requirements for that clearinghouse to process that transaction, to make sure that it moves downstream back to the provider, back to the submitter, so they understand exactly where their transactions are, if it was rejected or denied, or a front-end edit, remove that claim from adjudication. So providers, again, are kept aware of exactly where those claims are. There are also similar unique requirements for the 834 and the 820, that when a health plan receives these files or these transactions, that they actually process and adjudicate that data within 5 business days. Again, ensuring that member files are updated, are loaded, and that those members and that information is available for providers to conduct an eligibility transaction, for example. With the 834 being used by the health plan, uploading that information into their systems, processing it within those 5 business days. So you're trying to, again, make sure that the operating rules address business process issues on an infrastructure-wide basis for all of the transactions. And with that, I believe I'll hand the call over to Jessica for our open Q&A.
Thanks so much, Bob. And it does look like we have some time for questions. Let me remind you to please submit your questions by typing them into the questions panel on your dashboard, and please identify yourself so we can better respond to your question. So the first question, I will open it up, but I think it is a question for Bob. Question is, do the time frames for the Phase 4 CAQH Core Healthcare Claim Infrastructure Rule still apply if it is an especially large batch, or do the CAQH Core operating rules define the batch size?
It's a great question, one that is very specific to claims, and this came up through much of our discussion in the subgroups and the work groups, and even Kim Peters, I think, was part of those discussions. when we were developing the requirements for the rule. The core operating rules do not address or define what the size of a batch is, or what the definition of how many claims is in a batch. Is it too big? Is it too small? We allow that decision to be made by trading partners. So that would be something that would probably be included in your companion guide as a health plan. You don't want any more than 500 claims or 5,000 claims or 10,000 claims within that batch, because you may have certain limitations on your applications, on bandwidth, on your systems, of how you want to handle that. So all of those kind of requirements for how big of a batch can we process at any one time, how often should we get those kind of things should all be included in your companion guide.
Thank you, Bob. The next question's regarding the timeline for the compliance for. Denise, you want to take this question?
Sure, be happy to. There is no timeline currently established for adoption of the Phase 4 operating rules. Having worked for the federal government, having actually been in charge of this for a number of years, I can tell you that the regulatory process itself is a long and proactive one in terms of from the time a proposed rule is put out to a final rule. It can be anywhere from 18 to 24 months, and then on top of that there is implementation time allowed for the industry to get their systems and things in order. But that being said, I want to go back to one of Kim's comments earlier in our presentation from Humana, and you know, he made the point of they're not waiting for anybody from the government or a mandate to tell them when they should start doing this, because they see the value in the operating rules and the standards. And I would say if there is a question about a timeline, I would say if you're going to go ahead and, again, look at the industry and do what's right and what we all support, then I think that time is of the essence, and you should start undertaking some of the things that we talked about, like internal education and awareness and your analysis and planning sooner than later.
Thanks so much, Denise. And I just want to check in with our other speakers and see if anybody else wants to comment on that, and if not, I will go to the next question. Robert, Kim, do you want to comment on this, or?
Just only to say that, you know, we continue to implement new transactions all the time at Humana, and we're currently working on our attachments. We've got the unsolicited in process right now. Solicited is already in production in a pilot phase with about 4 providers, so we expect to roll that out further here in the next 3 to 6 months. And you know, I encourage the industry to move forward irregardless of, you know, when the timeline is, because the sooner you get this in, the more money you're going to save within your provider and processing system.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Kim. That's very helpful information. We've gotten a couple of questions on the status of the Phase 4 voluntary course certification. Denise, what's the status of that?
I think we still are on track for testing. I think the inquiry was about, is it going to be in late summer? We had hoped to have the testing out a little bit sooner, but as you all know, we go through a number of different testing modes to make sure that by the time it hits the streets that it absolutely works and is useful and there are no glitches. And we went through actually 2 rounds of alpha testing on it to make sure that the instructions were clear and understandable. So with that additional testing, the next beta testing on it will be sometime in the late summer, and then we hope to deploy the actual platform probably sometime in the early fall. So I'd say we're still pretty much on track, but you know, keep looking at our website, and if you have any specific questions about that, you can always contact our certification team here at CAQH Core.
And as soon as we go live with Phase 4 course certification, we'll do a how-to webinar, so we'll make sure that we share all the information and resources we have available with you. We've got a question on Safe Harbor, Bob. Could you just go one more time, go through the Safe Harbor requirements?
Yes, definitely, and maybe it would be helpful to go back to that slide. I don't have the slide number right in front of me, but the safe harbor requirements for the core operating rule detail that the minimum requirements for connectivity for authentication must be available to conduct the transactions by any trading partner that requests to conduct the transactions that way. So basically, or what that means is that as a health plan, you must be kind of ready and able to conduct the transactions using this connectivity method and using the specific authentication methods for each of the transactions. And so the safe harbor is really unchanged from the previous phases. We've had safe harbor since the beginning, and we can extend those requirements here in phase 4 for the other 4 transactions. It still allows you to continue to do business and conduct the transactions as you do today. So you do not have to de-implement, you don't have to unplug anything, you don't have to migrate your current trading partner community over to the new way of doing things. Obviously that would be great if you did, because it really does simplify and make it much easier and cheaper for you to conduct the transactions, everything under one pathway, everything coming in one way. To, again, you have an economy of savings and scale, because everything can come in one pathway. You don't have to support multiple connections, multiple connectivity methods, multiple trading partners doing it all different ways. The core safe harbor really is trying to drive towards kind of a national network for conducting the transactions all one way, all one pathway, and everyone can do it the same way.
Thanks so much, Bob. We've gotten a couple of questions regarding the companion guide that I hope you can comment on. The first question on the companion guide is whether multiple transaction sets can be included in a single companion guide, and the other question talks about the specific requirements in the companion guide, including referencing information that needs to be added to the companion guide. Can you comment on that, or where folks can find more resources specific to the companion guide?
Yes, definitely. The core master companion guide template is available on the website, and it is again, we have it's one template that we've used for the previous 3 phases, the same template for phase 4, and the specific requirements around, for example, coordination of benefits. Since that's related to the claim, you'll find that specific requirement around COB and the requirements for COB that must be published in your companion guide are found in the infrastructure rule for the 837. So although the requirements for each of the rules say that you have to use the master companion guide template if you publish a companion guide for that transaction, that specific requirement around COB, for example, is found in section 4.6.1. So there's a very specific requirement for COB in the 837 infrastructure rule. So that's how the companion guide kind of is applicable for each of the transactions. Now the other question about can you make one master companion guide for all the transactions? Yes, the core rules do allow for you to, since it's just a master template, you can have your 837 and your 835 combined into one companion guide if you wish. Put all your 27X transactions in one companion guide, or just put them all together in one companion guide. However you wish to publish that and use the template for your transactions, either by the ones or by paired transactions, or all of them in one, you can definitely do that. It does, the template supports that, and the operating rules allow for that.
Thanks, Bob. And we have time for one more question. And the question is, if you're a core certified entity and you're communicating with a non-core certified entity, does that first core certified entity have to respond within the, so it's a core certified entity communicating with a non-certified entity. Does the core certified entity have to respond within the specified response time that's in the rule?
Very subtle question, very tricky. No, that's a great question because
I got stuck.
No, this is to make sure, and the answer is yes, you do have to. If you're core certified, you must always, I guess, run the transactions through and follow the operating rule requirements, kind of no matter what. You are core certified, you're conducting the transactions using the core systems and applications that are all been approved and core certified and signed off. And this is really because many providers are not going to be core certified. but we're trying to ensure the providers receive the benefits of not only the infrastructure for these 4 transactions, but also for all of the HIPAA transactions, as well as the data content for some of the transactions like the 271 response or the 835. So to ensure that providers reap those benefits of being able to conduct the transactions using any system or vendor they want to, ensuring that they get acknowledgments, ensuring that they get the data content that they need. Core certified entities must always be in the mode of conducting the transactions via the core operating rule.
Thank you, Bob. And we've run out of time for questions, and I see that there are a few other questions still on there, so please submit them to the core@caqh.org mailbox, and we will make sure to get a response to you as soon as we possibly can. And we are out of time for today. I'd like to leave you with some takeaways, and I'd also like to thank our speakers, especially Kim Peters from Humana, and I'd like to thank the audience for taking time out of your day to join us. Please register for our next webinar on June 29th. And if you have questions or interested in learning more about CORE, here are some ways to connect with us. Don't forget to complete our webinar survey once you are ready to leave us today. And as soon as the recording of this webinar is available, we will email it to you. And finally, have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar.